Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Balk. I'm so glad to see so many people joining my presentation today. I'm going to share my screen. Oops, I can't share my screen yet because Christy might have to unblock her screen. Thanks, Christy. Okay. Let me make sure that I can. Myself set. So this presentation is all about a course that I teach at my high school in the Thousand Islands region. And you can see from the pictures, we live in a beautiful place. We live really far in the far reaches of Northern New York. Clayton, New York and Cape Vincent are the two towns that send kids to a school kind of in the middle location. And Thousand Islands is a summary place, but we have a relatively small school population. Our student body is usually about 75 kids per grade level. So it's pretty easy to get to know the students, their families, generations that go through the school district. So if you ever get a chance to come up to the Thousand Islands, I highly recommend summertime. So I noticed from other presentations, people have been talking about skills that students need to transition to college and career. And quite a few years ago, I got to hear Tony Wagner speak about his college and career readiness checklist, the survival skills that are needed for kids to have in order to graduate and move on. And so if you haven't had a chance to take a look at this, I think libraries are uniquely positioned to take a look at a lot of these skills, and incorporate them into what we do every day with students through research projects, through collaborations with teachers, getting kids to present their ideas in a safe place. So which skills out of this list do you think high schools need to focus in on most of all? I'd say all of them. I know that STEM maker places spark curiosity and imagination. A lot of the times we have kids that do critical thinking and problem solving through the work they're doing in the library. Even having initiative in entrepreneurialism. I know some libraries take places where kids can actually do some local businesses out of them. So it's a really good thing to kind of think about how your library can kind of incorporate these survival skills and get kids moving forward. Quite a few of the high schools that you've probably heard of have college classes that are incorporated into the curriculum. One of the ones that we have at our high school is called the Model Organization of States class. It's a Plattsburgh class at Thousand Islands High School. And one of the things that the kids have to do is they have to take a country and they have to represent that country at Plattsburgh at the end of the school year. So at the beginning of the school year, one of the things that I try to do is bring the class into the library and do an activity called Think, Puzzle, Explore with them. And what kids do is they have no knowledge of the country before they start. And so we go through these activities where we lay out the butcher paper and the kids have to do a little bit of mini research on their country. And they have to think about questions they want to ask. It's an inquiry project. And then it gives them an idea of what they can explore for the future. Buffy Hamilton is a librarian that currently teaches English, and I got this idea from her Living in the Layers blog. Another project that I did with some teachers in my building was this project called The Dinner Party. And we were inspired by Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party out of Brooklyn, New York, the Brooklyn Museum. And we had kids do a project-based learning activity where they had to research a person that they'd like to have dinner with, either someone who was in the past or present. And they had to do several elements with people in their group. They had to make an art piece, a mug and a plate. They had to make a commercial of that person, and they had to make a informational placemat. So getting people involved in doing things in the library, especially teachers, is something that we do a lot, collaborating within the building. Collaboration is something that I'm really passionate about, and it doesn't necessarily have to take place within the four walls of the high school, as we're going to kind of talk about. In addition to those MOS classes, we also have SUPA classes, Syracuse University Project Advanced classes. We also have some Jefferson Community College classes and Project Lead the Way classes. And through those classes, I got to know the community college librarian. Her name was Connie Holberg. She was the library director. She just retired a couple of years ago. And she was very interested in doing a project with local high school libraries to see what we could get kids to do to transition easier to college. The majority of my students end up in community college. And we were finding that a lot of the kids, when they were transitioning, were having issues, of course, with research and knowing how to ask good questions and finding the right way around a college library. So that way back in 2008, we had a working group. We called it Bridging the Gap, and we came up with 6 outcomes that we wanted the kids to know as they were transitioning into college. So understanding information problems, how to write a workable thesis statement with it, knowing how to select relevant sources, knowing how to effectively search and locate information. And once you find that information, how to draw on those sources to write or present a well-reasoned project, and then how to present the project once you've completed it and use appropriate ethical formatting, kids not plagiarizing. And then the last one was examine and evaluate the final product and a process that was used. So using those 6 outcomes, I went to my administration locally and I said, hey, I think it's important for us to teach these skills in a standalone class, and I'd be willing to teach the class. And so a class was designed. So administration bought in. We decided it was going to be a half English credit, half-year course. I teach it in the library, and sometimes if the library's not available, I'll do it in the classroom. We decided it was going to be 20 students maximum. I designed the curriculum, and it's open to seniors. So it was purposely designed for the kids that are transitioning. I linked the course here. If you want to see the PowerPoint, you can kind of see the syllabus. So a lot of what I do in my class is I teach kids how to create information products that are engaging and exciting. And so I use this software called Powtoon. I'm just going to show you the beginning of my course Introduction Powtoon. I use it as a summative assessment for kids, but you'll get a sense of what I teach when I have the little welcome. So based on what we had talked about at our Bridging the Gap discussion, we kind of decided what outcomes we wanted to have, and I decided that those outcomes could kind of come into 5 objectives. So over the course of the 20 weeks that I teach the course, I go through each one of these objectives, and kids kind of get all they can with it. So what I'm going to do in the next few slides is I'm going to actually dive into each topic just so you can see what I teach, and then you can ask questions. So, sorry. One of the first things I do with students is I talk about effective note-taking, because a lot of times in high schools, teachers give kids notes either to fill in, or they just give them the PowerPoints that they've printed out. And it's really one of the things that kids struggle with a lot in college is, what do I write down? what's important? What do I do when I don't know how to take notes? So we go through a lot of different methods of taking notes. One of the first things I talk about is back channeling. There's this software called free software called YoTeach. And when I watch videos, or even if I'm doing a lecture in class, I'll have a back channel running in the background so kids can actually ask questions or put down some of their thoughts about what they're thinking. And then I can go back into the transcript either live or after class and see what the kids were thinking. This really hits the kids that don't like to raise their hand a lot in class, but want to contribute something. And I find that especially for watching some kind of video clip or something that's, if a presenter comes to class and speaks, it gives kids a way to kind of engage without feeling like they're interrupting. And it's something that's very, very effective. So if you're interested and want to join, I threw in the chat, and I think you can back channel after this as well. I put the website at the bottom. One of the other things that I do, like I said, we graduate about 70 kids in a class. Kids usually have to have some kind of scaffolding hook to learn how to take notes. So one of the things I do when I teach about lecture-based notes is I give them the Cornell Note-taking system. And the reason why I put iTunes U on here is because the original idea for this came from iTunes University. iTunes University used to have free college classes available. I don't even know if iTunes U is still a thing, but it's where I initially got my original idea. And I have 20 kids maximum in my class. So I used to pretend I was a university professor, get up in front of class, have them take notes for a lecture. And I thought that was a really junky way to do it. So I thought when iTunes U came out, I was like, I'm going to just grab a really interesting lecture and have kids learn how to take Cornell Notes based on that. And so one of the things that I do with students is I play this course called Justice, and we take a look at, there's actually two courses, 2 half-hour courses on here. And one of the things I do first is I ask students, what do you notice about the lecture hall? And what do you focus on when you're taking notes? So I'm going to play a little clip of this just to kind of give you a sense of, first of all, it's Harvard. When I tell the kids we're going to Harvard for the day, they get very excited. And then they realize it's just online. But the lecture itself is very engaging. It's actually an ethics course, philosophy course. So I'll just play a little bit so you can see. Okay, so one of the things the kids notice right away is how big the lecture hall is. And every year, inevitably, somebody says, well, how does he grade everyone's paper? And so I have to explain to them what teaching assistants are. And they say, you know, that's a lot of grades, you know, I said, of course. But the lecture itself is really engaging. And if you notice the Cornell Notes, note-taking format, we talk about, when do you write questions down? What are you writing down in the main section? What goes in the box? What goes at the bottom is the summary. So it's a really good practice for them to kind of take lecture-based notes from a college lecture without me pretending I'm a professor. So it's one of the things that kids really enjoy to do.
This is a course about justice.
Another thing we do in our note-taking section is we talk about sketchnoting. Sketchnoting is great for students, again, who can learn differently. Kids who like to draw their notes out or do better with visual representation of notes. We actually watch a portion of this TED Talk called Drawing in Class. Joyce Valenza, another superstar school librarian, had it on her blog, Office School Library Journal's blog, and she talked about sketchnoting. So I find that when I teach sketchnoting to students, a lot of times kids who don't necessarily do well with reading and text really do well with sketchnoting notes. So I'm going to just show this little clip about sketchnoting, and then I'll talk about resources.
When you've done visual notes,
The way that you tell if you did it right is if you can look at your notes and tell back the story that you heard from that speaker, then you did it right. That's all there is to it. It's no more than that. Can you look at it and recall the story? After you've had some practice, it's really meditative doing visual note taking. It's kind of like a conversation between you and the speaker that takes place in your notebook, and you can recall that conversation later. It takes a little bit of practice to get to that point, but I hope that you will give it a try and practice it. And in fact,
so we do practice it in class. We watch, again, we watch some lectures, and I have kids sketch noted. We also do some sketch notes as at the end of class to summarize what they've learned, or sometimes I do it as a bell ringer at the beginning of class. And so one of the things they talk about in learning how to sketch note is having a visual vocabulary. And so when you're Sylvia Duckworth is somebody who's really kind of broken down sketchnoting for educators. She's got a few books out there about how to teach sketchnoting to students. And for example, her lesson one is like how to draw some school icons. You don't necessarily have to take all of the sketchnoting can come from your own head. You don't necessarily have to draw it as anyone else would. The whole point of sketchnoting is to, as long as you know what the pictures represent, it's fine. It really is just to help you retain information and remember lectures. One of the things, I've done this with seniors, and I've also done this with my youngest students, which are sixth graders, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples. So one of the articles we read in class is how the US Mint makes pennies and nickels, and it costs the US Mint 11 cents to make a nickel, and it costs like, I don't know, 7 cents or something to make a penny. It costs a lot of money to make this money. And so one of the things I had my sixth graders do is actually read the article, summarize the article, and then make a visual representation of it. This one was really awesome. This was a girl in sixth grade, and she made a penny family, and the FBI is knocking on the door and says, FBI, open up pennies. And they're kind of like all, hanging out on the wall. And she even made a penny dog. And so we did this article probably in November, and still by like May, the kids could remember what the article was about because they did the visualization. Here's another one. Abraham Lincoln's crying because we might get rid of pennies, and he's just upset about it. And there's a trash can underneath. So doing sketchnoting can work at all levels, especially for students, again, who aren't necessarily really good at text summarization. Some kids do really well with the visualization. I threw some other resources in here in case you're interested in teaching some sketchnoting in your library with kids. Vicki Davis has a sketchnote lesson, she's the Cool Cat Teacher blog. She is a phenomenal resource for educators. And if you don't know Kathy Schrock's Guide to Everything, she literally covers everything related to technology. And her sketchnoting in the Classroom Schrock Guide is comprehensive and deep. So I put a link there in case you're interested. So kids do love visual communication. One of the summative activities I do with my students at the end of a unit is another kind of sketchnoting activity. I use this software called Pixton. So kids have to give me a summative analysis of something we've learned about in class. So Pixton is free for educators, but for like a trial period, but then you can pay for a unit. So two things that I taught in my digital research class, one is about net neutrality. And sometimes I also talk about databases, free versus fee. And so these were taught at different times, and these were different years, I think. So I just threw up here how kids visualize stuff and kind of get it on paper is sometimes, it blows me away what they come up with. And so Sophie's net neutrality thing, the sun was the companies that don't want net neutrality to stay, and the earth was why net neutrality is so important. And then Zozan's thing is on just communicating about what's so good about using databases versus Google. One of the other things that I talk about in my course is how to evaluate information critically. And I'll have to say that over the last 2 or 3 years, this really has kind of blown up and has become a little bit bigger in my curriculum with my digital research class. And so Frontline, a PBS show, has a couple of really great videos out there. I used to teach Digital Nation back in 2008-09, talking about how the digital world has impacted you. And one of the professors in that video talks, his name is Mark Bauerlein, and he talks about how students today are the dumbest generation. And so from that little clip in the Digital Nation video, when we watch it, I have kids debate, are you the dumbest generation? Yes or no? And so we do some mini debates in there, and kids get really upset when they think that we think that they're dumb. And it's always interesting to hear how they craft, you know, why using resources from the internet is actually the smarter way to go. I always have kids do that. Another thing that I teach, this is a newer video, is in the age of AI, how artificial intelligence is actually going to change the world they inherit and go out into. So I show parts of this video too. This was a relatively new, I want to say this came out maybe 2-3 years ago.
The more data, the better the AI works. In the age of AI, where data is the new oil, China is the new Saudi Arabia.
There will be a Chinese tech sector, there will be an American tech sector.
Machines are automating some of our skills.
When I increase productivity through automation, jobs go away.
It has pervaded so many elements of everyday life. How do we make it transparent and accountable?
So it really talks about how jobs of the future are changing, and how it talks about how, you know, artificial intelligence impacts privacy as well as careers. It has a lot of good information that we kind of dive into, and kids have really good discussions about. Sorry, every time. If you haven't seen it, or maybe you have heard about it, Common Sense Media has a really good curriculum for K through 12 students. And so some of their canned lessons, or their lessons that are pre-formatted, are really great and dive really well into some of the things you want to talk about. The ones that I listed here: clicks for cash, hoaxes and fakes, challenging confirmation bias. We talked about that quite a bit. And filter bubble trouble. It's like how we live in our own filter bubbles. Those are the high school lessons for misinformation, disinformation. So that's something that you can use. And if you haven't had a chance to take a look at their curriculum, it's excellent. I'll just play this quick little thing just to show you. It's from Common Sense Media. I'm not playing the background music because I think it's just, you know. Again, this is all free stuff to use, and it's already kind of designed for you. So I filter in some of those lessons with the kids. Another one that's super fantastic is Checkology. Checkology is another free resource that has a ton of good information that is already kind of organized and planned for kids. I'll show you a little PSA on this one. I can't recommend Checkology enough.
Today's students are facing the most challenging information landscape in history. Rumors, conspiracy theories, and false information compete for attention alongside facts, evidence, and truth. Young people are not being prepared to recognize the difference. This lack of news literacy is a threat to democracy. Education is the solution. Checkology, created by the nation's leading provider of news literacy education, can help. Designed by educators for educators to bring news literacy to your classroom. It's easy to get started, and with just a couple of clicks, you'll be on your way. Setting up a class is simple. And whether they're in the classroom or learning from home, students can log in individually for independent learning. Checkology includes more than a dozen interactive lessons taught by real-world experts.
Hi, I'm Tracy Potts. I'm Kimberly Strassel.
Hi, I'm Enrique Acevedo. I'm Wesley Lowry.
Schedule a virtual or in-person visit to your classroom with a journalist enrolled in our Newsroom to Classroom program. Checkology is designed to engage students' critical thinking and spark discussion around news literacy. Speaking of discussions, there's a place for that, as well as additional tools for students to practice and extend their new skills. Keep track of your students' progress toward goals with real-time notifications and a metrics dashboard. Checkology works. Checkology students can correctly identify quality journalism, the freedoms of the First Amendment, and demonstrate an understanding of the watchdog role of the press.
So you get the idea. Checkology, again, is something that I use quite often. I don't use all of the lessons that are in there. I pretty much just pick one or two things that I want to go through with the students. But again, content that's already created and kind of curated is, for a small little school like mine, it's just a really helpful thing.
Today's students are facing the most challenges.
A couple of other things I use for misinformation, disinformation. If you haven't heard of Jennifer Lagarde, she's a librarian, school media specialist, who has a book out called Fact versus Fiction. In fact, she's got another book coming out in November called Digital Detectives. And she talks about how students can wade through all of the information specifically on their phones, as opposed to in schools, a lot of times we get stuck teaching kids how to do stuff on desktops or Chromebooks. But Jennifer Lagarde talks about specifically how information looks different on a cell phone versus on a desktop or laptop. And so she has some really cool activities you can do with students using cell phones. So I thought that was kind of cool, because most of our kids do stuff, you know, of course, they get most of their information off their cell phone. Newseum is another resource you can kind of click through. They just closed their actual physical site in Washington, D.C. recently, but they have an educator section on their webpage that's really pretty good. There are some lesson plans there too. I also wanted to highlight, there's a fun series off of, again, Common Sense Education partner with PBS to do a series called Above the Noise. And this one is kind of geared, there's a whole bunch of different videos related to social media and students. This one in particular, I'm going to show you a little clip of, is called When is Your Brain Ready for Social Media? And it's something we talk about a lot with kids. I often ask kids, like, do you have phantom vibrations go off on your, you know, next to your leg or something when you have your phone in your pocket, but your phone's not really in your pocket? You know, you have ghost vibrations because you're so used to having it. So Above the Noise is another great little video series that I teach with kids. Oops, sorry. And you can kind of see, I didn't mean to click away, but is the internet making you meaner? I'll go back. Sorry. I'll just play a little bit here.
So back in the day, way back in 2006, when I was 12 years old, the principal came to the classroom to warn us about the dangers of MySpace. Cyberbullying, inappropriate content, stranger danger. Now, if you don't know what MySpace is, it's basically like Facebook with music, kind of. But anyway, the principal tries to scare us, and that just made me want a MySpace even more. So I go home, ask my mom, can I have a MySpace? She's like, sure, I don't care. So I go and make one, but you have to be 13. So what do? I just lied and clicked that I was 13. And there you go. That's the start of my social media career. So that's my story. But now it seems like there's tons of kids on social media. And when I say kids, I mean like little kids, 8 and under. Maybe their parents started an account for them when they were babies and now they want to take control of their own brand. Or they were like me and just lied and clicked, yes, I'm 13. But just because it was easy for me to get on social media, should I have been?
So you get the idea. So he poses a question, kind of goes through it, and it's another great discussion jump off point for kids. I have to say, because of my partnership with the Jefferson Community College librarians, a few years ago, Carlene Lawson came and did a little presentation about Mike Caulfield's the 4 moves, or as you might know it as SIFT, right? And so Mike Caulfield has really stepped up his game and the people he's working with. And they've come out with some really new, brand new lessons for teachers. And one of the first ones I used to teach is the Check Please starter course. That's still available and out there. And the book that he has, the digital book that he has, is called Web Literacy for Student Fact Checkers. I just put a link there. But the one that I really, really like is his Control F lessons. And all of those lessons are designed for teachers and educators to kind of get kids thinking laterally about what they're searching, as well as what they should be looking for when they're checking for information. I'm just going to show you Mike Caulfield and his people and what that's about.
My name is Jane, and I'm a senior disinformation reporter with BuzzFeed News. And for the last 3.5 years or so, I've been investigating hoaxes, conspiracies, mis and disinformation, spending my days digging into little clues that we find on social media, stringing them together and trying to figure out who's behind all of this, how disinformation spreads, and what the truth really is. Over this series of videos, I'm going to introduce you to 3 key skills that you can use to investigate information online. And my colleague, digital literacy expert Mike Caulfield, will demonstrate simple but powerful ways to use these skills to sort fact from fiction and determine what is credible.
It's no secret that the web is full of a lot of nonsense. And a lot of that nonsense is relatively harmless, whether it's fake bakes on TikTok or photoshopped images on Instagram, but some of it is deadly serious.
Misinformation works because of our emotions. When we feel a heightened emotion, whether that's anxiety, anger, panic, or the opposite, extreme elation, what we want to do is we want to pass that information on to other people. So if there is a message online, whether it's a piece of news or a meme or a video or whatever, that you really want to send to your friends, to your family, to your followers, then that is the moment to sort of pause and say, maybe I should Google this real quick.
If you've had a media literacy course before.
So you get the idea. They're check, Control F, find the fact lessons. Get kids to really think about checking before you pass on bad information. Adults are guilty of this all the time as well. Their main point is if you're feeling emotional about something, that's what they want you to do, right? So if we can get students to kind of think about misinformation, disinformation, or just becoming more aware of what they could do to make sure that they're checking information before they're passing it on. So important.
My name is
Sorry,
Jane.
every time I do it. Another part of my course is I teach kids about the ethical use of information. So many times kids think that I am the bibliography queen when I come in to do their research papers with them. Part of my course, though, is talking about, yes, you should be using bibliographies in your information and citing sources all the time. But it's also talking about other things that are ethical use of information. For example, when is it okay to take we also take a look at remixes. What is a remix? And are there any original ideas out there anymore? And we watched this quick little video. It's not so quick, but I'm just going to show you a quick little thing. This video is called Everything's a Remix, and it kind of defines for kids what remixing is. And there's a little commercial in the beginning.
Remix, to combine or edit existing materials to produce something new. The term remix originally applied to music. It rose to prominence late last century during the heyday of hip-hop. Form to incorporate sampling from existing recordings. Early example, Sugar Hill Gang samples the bass riff from Chic's Good Times in the 1979 hit, Rapper's Delight.
Now what you hear is not a test, I'm rapping to the beat. And me, the groove, and my friends are gonna try to move your feet.
Since then, that same bass line has been sampled dozens of times.
pulling up with Jodeci, blessing up my 15.
Okay, I'm going to stop the groove. Kids love anything that you can incorporate with music. Obviously, teens love music. One of the things that we do after we watch this, and this video actually goes into how Led Zeppelin sampled illegally somebody else's music or took somebody else's music and pawned it off as their own. And so we kind of go into court cases and copyright, and that's kind of our entryway into it. And then by the end of the unit, we actually have a mock trial where the kids take the positions of lawyers. So some kids are the defendant's lawyers, some kids are the prosecution's lawyers, and we actually have a teacher become the judge. And the mock trial that we do is the one that's listed here. It's from the Electronic Frontier Foundation on teaching copyright. And so the case revolves around the Disney Corporation and a professor. The professor is actually a real professor. He teaches copyright, and he did a mashup or a remix of using Disney clips. And so in the mock trial, kids present the ideas. If they're the Disney Corporation, that he violated fair use. And if they are defending the professor, they say it's totally fair use. So the kids by the end of the mock trial actually have a sense of what copyright law is, what fair use is, and they have a good sense of, they love playing courtroom drama. So some of the kids are really good at getting indignant on the stand. So that's always a fun unit. If you're interested, Ginger Tebow from St. Lawrence BOCES did a really good copyright for educators presentation at one of the last conferences we did, and I just threw that on my website or on this PowerPoint too. One of the things that we decided back in 2008, that kids needed to be better at producing information products. Now, in 2008 is way different than 2021. Obviously, in 2021, kids are really it's much easier to make fun information products that are out there using software. But one of the things I think kids are really not great at is getting their ideas condensed into a format that's easy to understand. And so I took some business principles. There's lots of business books out there, a lot of smart people talking about how to make your presentations pop. And so these are 3 of the books that we kind of talk about in class. One of them is called The Back of the Napkin by Dan Rome. And basically the gist of it is, can you get your idea to fit on the back of a napkin? Again, it brings in a little bit of our visual note taking, because he does a lot with visuals. And so again, it's almost like if your idea can fit on the back of a napkin and you can convey it so someone can understand it, it's probably something that you know well enough to convey. We also take a look at Gar Reynolds' presentation Zen. He talks about how your PowerPoints can be a little bit more less cluttered, and your idea, the whole idea about presenting something is getting to a place where you can actually tell your story. And then the Heath brothers, Chip and Dan Heath, wrote this book called Made to Stick. They even have an educator's guide that goes with it. We actually have the print copies in the library that we read some of the chapters with. And then the kids actually have to do a sticky presentation. That's our final culminating activity. So I'll show you a little clip of this. I think this is Dan Heath.
Maybe you've seen a PowerPoint presentation before that looks a little something like this. Maybe you've actually been the author of a PowerPoint presentation that looks like that. And I'll admit this is a little bit unfair, because usually people are savvy enough to include a little bit of clip art, for some visual interest. So here's a question. How do you avoid that dreaded bullet-drenched PowerPoint that everybody hates? Well, 3 tips. First of all, be simple. Now, I know you've heard this before, but it's worth hearing again. There's a trial lawyer who's done something curious throughout his career. After every case, he does a focus group with the jury to see what arguments worked. And there's one overriding lesson he's learned over all the years, and that is that if you make 10 arguments to the jury, no matter how good each one of those arguments is individually, by the time they get back to the jury room, they remember nothing. If you say 10 things, you say nothing. Now, your colleagues are your jury. You've got to be ruthless when you cut. I know it's hard to cut those secondary points on slide 16, but get it done.
Let your main point shine through.
Okay, so he kind of goes through, you'll see it's a 3-minute video, but he kind of goes through all of his points. They have this thing called success. The success acronym stands for stuff like be simple, be unexpected, be concrete, and he goes on and on. And kids really kind of do well with it. So I've been really kind of thinking a lot about how kids transition. Part of the unit that we do also in the digital research course, we take a look at Kent State University as a really nice transitioning to college LibGuide. I also take every single senior, I see you, Christy, on a community college visit. So I have about 70 kids in my graduating class, and I take every single kid on a field trip to the local community college. And even if they're not going to community college, even if they're not college bound, it still kind of does a couple things. One, it shows them that community colleges you can go there even after you graduate. If something doesn't work out, you at least are familiar with the local one. Two, they have a lot of they actually do lend stuff to the public, which the kids have no idea about. So it gives them a chance to kind of shine and show them what's there. And then we actually go through some stations in the library and we do some fun scavenger hunt type stuff. And then they also get a first professional in-person lecture with a little debrief after. And he talks about the person that does comic books and history, and kids like that lecture a lot. SUNY Jefferson also has a really nice information literacy tutorial that kids can go to and kind of see what to expect before they expect it. And that's something we do during the course. Okay, I'm wrapping up. Sorry. Since Bridging the Gap, since we've met in 2008, we've had a Northern New York High School to College interest group, which Christy's the leader of. Yay, Christy. And we've actually spoken at a couple conferences. We created in 2019, we had a successful approaches to college transitions at Jefferson Community College, and I included Tiffany Squire's keynote on there, some skills that students need to be successful in college, and that PowerPoint is pretty good, different stuff. Okay. I take my kids whitewater rafting every year. Every single senior goes whitewater rafting on the Black River to kick off our school year. It's just because it's a small school, we do fun stuff like that. There's my Twitter handle and my email if you want to get hold of me. There's my bibliography because, I have to have one. And the presentation will be available. The slideshow will be available and you can click all the links, but thank you. Sorry, I was nervous in the beginning and I kind of got in my groove.
No, that's great, Melissa, thank you. Did you want me to read the questions to you?
Sure.
So far we have a couple. Joanna asks, as a high school librarian, I'm expected to be available for research projects, book talks, etc. in our flexibly scheduled library. Do you have any issues creating a scheduled class that meets on a regular basis?
So because we're really small, it's one period a day for 20 weeks. So I have less of an issue kind of sandwiching in other stuff. I also have a 6th grade class that I teach once a week. And that, again, small class on a rotating basis. I'm sure in a bigger school, you may have other issues. Although if you know anything about project-based learning, the fact that we could pull off a project-based learning in a scheduled 9-period day project is pretty amazing. So if you have administration that's willing to kind of take some risks, you can be really creative in what you can get done.
Great. Amber asks, what do the students learn in the stations do the students go through at the Jefferson Community College Library Day?
Okay, so there's 3 stations. The first station, we talked about LC because they learn Dewey because high school libraries do Dewey, but college libraries do LC, and they're very different systems. So one of the stations is we do a scavenger hunt with LC using iPads. The second station is databases, talking about, because I have databases, but I don't have as many databases as the colleges do. So we do a little database dive. So there's another, we go into a different section. And then the third one is John, the new head of the Dewey Library at JCC, does authoritative. How do you know a source is authoritative? So he does a little medical journal kind of thing on smoking, and the kids have to evaluate the professionalism, so to speak, of each of the authors.
Great, thank you. Michelle asks, it's clear, well, states and then asks, it's clear you've had success getting teachers to collaborate. What are your secrets?
So I have to say I've been doing this a while, and face-to-face is really the only way I would get people to work with me, asking directly. It's hard, it's easy to say no to an email. And I know in a bigger school, it's tougher. I've done projects with math people, science people, social studies people, but we're a small school. And so I think teachers kind of realize the value added that librarians can bring to programs. Even if you can just give them lesson ideas or something that's going to enhance what they're already teaching, having a good handle on the high school curriculum is really important too. Knowing what your teachers are teaching at what time of year is a really good way to kind of get in with them.
Great, thanks for letting us in on some of those secrets. Karen asks, in our high school library, we usually see students only for a few days while helping their classes do research for specific projects. What do you think is the best way to incorporate these important information literacy points into lessons that have to focus on the details of using the databases to find the articles?
Okay, that's probably the number one thing that high school librarians struggle with is you probably only see the English department and only when they're doing research papers. Getting teachers to buy into the idea that paid resources is more valuable than just having kids just do a Google search is something that I struggled with in the beginning too. Again, trying to form relationships with the faculty and making their lives easier instead of harder is always a thing. Christy, just recap the question. I don't think I'm answering it.
I went back to my script. Let me go back here. In our high school library, we usually see students only for a few days while helping their classes do research for specific projects. What do you think is the best way to incorporate these important information literacy points into lessons that have to focus on the details of using the databases to find articles?
Right. So again, the authority of what the kids are looking at is some way you can kind of back end. If they have to do a research paper on, I'll just take that smoking topic, having them look at the different articles from Google versus the databases, and then incorporating some of that lateral reading that Mike Caulfield talks about is a way that you can kind of incorporate some of those disinformation, misinformation things in there. And trying not to use really fake looking sites. Like a lot of people use that octopus tree thing. Having the kids look at actual real sites that they would encounter is really more valuable. And having them do some lateral reading is just basically, instead of looking at a website from just top to bottom, taking a look at part of it and then comparing it with another site and another resource and another book.
Great. We have another one. Monica asks, I am an academic librarian and would like to work with local high schools when it comes to teaching the students research, especially in the schools that do not have a school librarian. What suggestions can you give someone like me when it comes to working with the teachers and the students?
So I don't know if you're in New York State, but usually BOCES are a really great way for, if you get a hold of the local BOCES school library system chapter, usually there's a director of that has an in with all of the local librarians, usually the academic library, the school library systems usually have one person that you can kind of deal with. And maybe that's a good person to start with if you wanted to kind of get to know who the librarians are in your local communities and what are their names, and then send an email. The public librarians are another person that you can actually do some stuff with. We just did, Christy's a public librarian, so We just did a thing with the Cape Public Library around Halloween time. We did the Halloween Hunger Games. Partnering with I wish more school libraries could partner with the local public libraries too, because they're a great resource as well for summer reading lists and just collaborating with them on just some projects during the school year, some fun stuff.
And yeah, and I also put in the chat that if you are in New York State, your local Library Resources Council could help connect you with the local school library systems in your area. Many of us have interest groups that we have started, so that could be an in for you as well.
If there's a school that doesn't have a school librarian, which is very possible. In fact, it's hard to find high school librarians that focus just on the high school. A lot of times they have a librarian, but they're elementary focused. So putting up, even connecting with like the local principal of that building, there may be a way that you can kind of say, hey, you know, if there's an English teacher I can connect with that I can help, usually it would be the English department or social studies department that would be a good in.
Great. There are no more questions. I will thank everyone, thank Melissa, thank you attendees for joining us today. The next presentation will be Reinforcement and Rapport, Supporting English Language Learners in Academic Libraries. And you can access the meeting from the Pillars program and join us there at 4 p.m. Eastern in just 5 minutes.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.